Alright, hello my fellow mushy globs of exploded star ashes. My name's Hans, devoted father of this tribe of leafy children, obsessed with teal bricks, and berserk for Legos. Today I'm gonna make your sig figs super jealous with these ultra cool and sexy Paradisa style sports cars. So strap on your Puma speed cats, put on your 1930s racing goggles, and let's mash that electric go fast pedal. Shhooom! Well, alrighty then. So today I'm going to introduce you guys to these three cars right here. Now, as you can see, I have got plenty of sports cars that I have mocked and remocked. So what I'm going to do is create a video series slowly over time throughout the next year or two of just sports cars. And today we're going to start with these three. First, I'll talk about this little blue sports car, which is a remock. Then I'll talk about the little red Corvette. You'll recognize that as a remock. And over here, I'll talk about this little blue car last, which is 100% my own mock. Alright, you may not recognize this, but this is actually the blue sports car from the Capital City set, 60200. Now, the sports car in the Capital City set was kind of this chunky looking beast. It was a bit of a fastback, maybe even a shooting brake sports car look to it, but with the front windshield and the roof of the car, it almost gave it kind of like this armored, hulked down kind of look to the car. And what I wanted to do was kind of trim down that hulkiness to it and make it a lot more sleeker and give it a little thinner of a profile. And what I ended up with was something that looks a little more like an Italian sports car. And I really like how it came out. So one of the first things I did was to change that windshield. Now, a couple of years ago when I started getting my hands on some of these windshields, I was kind of going in and swapping all my sports cars to have these little windshields right there. And these were the Speed Champion windshields on all the sets pre-2020. And what I like about these windshields is that they're just a lot more sleeker. They're raked back a lot further than the standard Lego windshields that they had before that. Moving over to the back window, this is another conversion that I do to most of my cars. Is Lego's been producing some sports cars where it doesn't have a real back window, it just kind of has a bunch of bricks built up to make it look like there's a back window there. I'm using like black bricks, and again, I'm a sucker for realisticness. A lot of those cars, I'll just kind of tear it all out and then just rebuild it using an actual Lego window piece. And so that's what I did. I took what used to be the front windshield and put it back here on the back. And of course, just switching out these two window pieces completely changed the whole look of the car. So previously the front windshield was a little bit more vertical, it had a long roof, and then it had a brick built back end, a fastback hatchback, or a shooting brake look at the back of the car. And by swapping into this rear window, it actually gave the back end of this car a little bit of a trunk back here, which to me I think looks a lot better. And I'm not a big fan of European shooting brake style sports cars. I think they just kind of look awkward. Now, one thing you might be thinking is, gosh, that looks an awful lot like the new sports car that just came out in 2021, 60285. It's a similar color. The new sports car is a dark azure. This is the standard Lego blue. It's also using the same front air scoop, and also it's using the same 2x4 slope brick running right up the very center of the hood. Now, I remocked this long before Lego's new sports car ever came out. However, one thing to note is that the appearance of this car is really a European, almost like an Italian sports car look to it, whereas the new Lego sports car has more of a kind of Corvette muscle car to it with a long front end. And that's because this front windshield sits one stud forward, so it makes the whole cab look like it's a little bit more forward. And the new sports car, the windshield is not as long, so it sits one stud back, which gives the front hood of the car a much longer look to it. Here you can see that I've kept the swoops that go over the front and the rear fenders. I've just made them sleeker and sexier compared to what the original car was. I used a much sleeker 1x4 bow slope brick and replaced what used to be the 1x3 bow slope, which has a much more rounded shape to it. And actually that 1x3 bow slope got moved to the rear of the car. So originally on the rear of the car, it had this profile from here over to here. And another thing that I did is that all of these bow slopes here in the very middle of the hood are actually sitting one plate lower. So here the car is really transformed from that kind of hulking muscle car look to a more sleek Italian supercar look to it. And then I also swapped in these 1x2 bow slopes with the chopped off corner. And I did the same thing up here to give it that supercar air outtakes So the air will kind of swoop in through here, go underneath these pieces, and kind of shoot out that way to help with the aerodynamics. Now I left the headlights alone, identical to what it was on the original car. I also decided to swap the colors on the front hood from black to the same blue color. Now, one characteristic of this car that I don't like is the front end sticks out from the tires by 2 studs. And I try to avoid cars with 2 stud front ends because it gives a very long front overhang. But my big reasoning is due to functionality. Cars with 2 stud front overhangs don't do so well when it comes to driving over speed bumps, when it comes to going up ramps, or when it comes to driving up onto a flatbed tow truck. This whole front end just scrapes. So all my cars, I make an effort to do less than 2 studs. A lot of times I'll just do straight up snot techniques on the front of the cars, or I'll do 1 stud plus like a plate or 2, but I always try to avoid or having front ends that extend 2 studs out. So I did give an exception to this car. The other thing is that with 2 studs long, it gives the appearance that the front wheel is sitting too far back, which is something I don't like. It makes the car look completely off. So I actually think that this wheel should be a little bit forward and closer to the front end. There's nothing I can do about that. So that is one complaint that I have about these bow slope pieces. And the way these wheel arches are designed, it's got a plate that runs across the top right there. And the way these are designed is that they've got these little notches. And the thing about this bow slope is that it's not notched out quite enough. Because when I'm mocking up sports cars, a lot of times I want the front end of the hood to be as low as possible. And what this does is that it forces the hood of the car to be 1 plate taller than I would like. And when it is 1 plate taller, it ends up scaling up the front of the car, where I'm trying to achieve a very low profile. If Lego could have notched this like 1 plate taller and 1 stud further into here, I would love this piece even more. And same thing for here, if they could have notched it 1 stud further this way. Now it could be that maybe they couldn't do it because it would have been too close over here and it would have made the brick very easy to break, or maybe it wouldn't have agreed with the plastic injection molding machines as the plastic flows into the tooling mold, and maybe the part would have had too many issues coming out of the tool mold, or maybe the piece would have had some severe warpage right in that spot. This is just speculation, but or maybe they totally can do it. Now, one thing I really like about this, and this was on the original car itself, is the stance. And what some of the Lego designers have done on some of these car sets is this back wheel is actually sitting on another plate, which raises up the back end and makes the front end of the car kind of pointing down towards the road. And I really like adding this sort of stance to Lego sports cars. All right, and on the back, I left the double round taillights that were on the original car, and I actually added a couple more of those 1x2 bow slopes with the cutoff corners, just because it matches the style of the front of the car. And because I shortened up the top of the car, I swapped in these 4x4 molded roof pieces, and then I put in a third brake light up there at the top. Now this piece right here used to be up here as part of the rear window, and I just positioned it much lower as to be part of the trunk. And then down here on the front bumper, I actually added these 1x2 bow slopes with the cutoff corners. One of my newest changes I've done, it was to put in the silver wheels. Lego only just barely came out with the silver wheels when they introduced the party bus on the Lego Movie 2. And ever since that particular set, they've introduced this wheel a lot more to some other sets with vehicles, and I have been busy swapping in a lot of these silver wheels on a lot of my cars. So the interior is pretty basic. I've kept it pretty standard. I swapped out the steering wheel and put in a touchscreen, and this is a car of the future. It is an electric car, and it is also a fully autonomous car. In order to get to the lady's handbag, you'll just have to pop off that rear windshield right there. So yeah, I really like how this car turned out. I got rid of the hulkiness to it. I slimmed it down, I made it sleeker, and in the end, it completely changed the entire look of the car. And now to me, it just looked like a really fast Italian sports car. All right, car number 2. This is Lola, Agent Coulsen's little red Corvette. Now, this came in the set 76077 Iron Man Detroit Steel Attacks. And if you guys have watched the show Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., you'll know that Agent Coulsen absolutely loves his little red car. This thing can have its wheels fold inwards and they can pretty much just take off and fly, kind of very Back to the Future DeLorean style. And so that's what the original set had. It had these really large wheels, and you just kind of turned a little lever in the back and the whole set of wheels would tuck underneath the car, and then you could pretend that it can fly. And I think the original designer did a really good job on this little Corvette. So my only pet peeve of that particular car is that, you know, the wheels were just way too big. It's not my standard size wheel for city cars. Also, the car just kind of felt a little too big big. So I actually kind of scaled the car down. The first thing I did was to go and swap in these wheels. So it required me to restructure the whole chassis underneath in order to get those wheels in there. And the other thing that I did was I scaled down the back end. The back end of the car used to stick out by 2 studs. I've now reduced it down to 1 stud, and I also shortened the wheelbase. So instead of this midspan being 6 studs long, it is now only 5 studs long. And if you know anything about these old school classic Corvettes, they are actually really small cars. So when I shortened the wheelbase by 1 stud, obviously the windshield had to move forward by 1 stud. I also swapped in the clear windshield for a dark tinted windshield. I swapped in a 1x4 brick with a bow slope on the top of it to make it look like a rear bench seat. I would have liked to move the driver over to the left side of the car, but because of how sleek and slim this car is, I'm actually using this Lego chassis piece in order to get the driver to sit as low as he does. And that brings up another interesting point, and that is all of Lego's car chassis are only designed to sit a single minifigure in the very center of the car. Now this chassis piece was designed in the early 2000s, and this was right around when they first started doing 6 stud wide cars, but we're still doing small cars at 4 studs wide. So this seating pocket is only 2 studs wide, and even when I do use this particular piece in a 6 stud wide car, I can't get a minifigure over to the other side, not without making the minifigure sit 2 plates taller, which then causes me to scale up the entire car, and then the car is completely out of proportion. Same thing applies to this. This was a chassis that was designed in the very early 90s for the Formula 1 cars and was used very frequently ever since then. And this is Lego's newer chassis plate. It has been designed, I think, within the last 8 years. This is actually designed for a 6 stud wide car, but again, you can see that it's pretty much borrowing a lot from the original chassis plate from the early 2000s, and they didn't do anything to allow us to have 4 stud wide seating space in there. So again, the minifigures are constrained to only sitting in the very middle of the car, which is very disappointing. Now, one thing I do understand is that a lot of that has to do with this very thin connection right there. So if they were to make this 4 studs wide, then the connection going from here over to this last row of studs would be very thin and fragile, but it's not impossible. I've actually done some CAD work on designing my own Lego chassis plates that would allow me to do that. And one of the newer chassis plates that Lego just recently came out, I think either in 2019 or 2020, which actually has the axles already on the plate itself. And again, while they got rid of that extra plate right here, the minifigure seating position is still restricted to the very center of the car. And again, I'm not able to get the minifigure to sit on either the left or the right side of the car. And the other thing is I don't really like how they attached the wheel axles to this chassis plate. It now limits the freedom of being able to raise or lower the wheels. Like you wouldn't be able to use this chassis plate for 4x4 vehicles, which are much higher off the ground. And the other thing is it doesn't allow me to create that angled stance on a lot of my sports car MOCs. And Lego's newest chassis, which came out in 2020 as part of the Speed Champions, and this is for the 8 stud wide cars in the Speed Champions, and it actually does have 6 stud wide seating. However, it cannot accommodate 6 stud wide wheels, not without raising this whole thing up considerably too high, which by that point would be completely pointless because it would just raise the minifigure too high up out of the car. The other thing is this chassis plate has these studs on the side right here, which you then have to cover up. And then again, it would still make your 6 stud wide car much too fat because you'd then have to put on a 1x6 tile just to cover up these studs. Over the summer last year, I actually used this as part of my 6 stud wide limo MOC just so that I could utilize this seat cavity. However, I just ended up getting rid of it because these studs on the side right here and then having to cover it up with a tile, and then it just stuck out of the side of the car and just looked completely awkward and out of place. So moving over to the back, what I did was I just used a couple of 1x1 round transparent red pieces. Now previously I was using some 1x2 plates that had the sliding side rail on it to make it look like it had a back bumper. And I got rid of that just recently and swapped in a couple of 1x2 grill tiles that are the silver chrome plating just to give it a shaved clean appearance, but still kind of symbolize that there used to be a bumper there. So I really like how this car came out. I'm really glad that I scaled it down, and I just like how sleek and awesome it turned out. Alright, and this car is 100% my own MOC. In the very beginning, I had a very specific goal for when I started designing this car. Now, it looks completely different from when it started off. So my original goal with this car was to create a sport luxury coupe, very much like the BMW 4 Series, the Mercedes E-Class coupe, the Audi A5, S5, RS5. And in fact, the Audi S5 was more of a direct inspiration for this particular car. And when I first mocked it up, it was very much different looking than what you see right now. This car used to have a very big 2x4 front grille right on the very front. It just took up the whole front end of it. It also had a slightly longer front end and a slightly longer back end. And then in my latest remock of it, the changes that I made to the front end and the back end completely changed the way this car looked. Now it kind of has this kind of feisty Alfa Romeo Lancia small European sports car look to it. And that's mainly because of the high center line of the front here, which then tucks inwards towards the very bottom of the car. So here you can see that I kind of kept a very large looking grille, but I replaced it with smooth bow slope tiles. And that was because this is an electric car. It's a car of the future. Electric cars don't even need an air intake or a grille. So as an electric car, it's going to be smooth and flush. I decided to use the dark gray to make it look as though there is some sort of design element to appear as though there could be a front grille there. And the one thing that bothers me about these headlights as well as the taillights is the fact that they're rectangular and I can't really incorporate them into the angled front corners of the cars. And this is where I want to reach out to Lego and say, I don't know why you guys haven't thought of this already, but please, 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 please make this in transparent yellow and transparent red so that we can use these pieces for headlights and rear taillights. I would be able to do a lot of amazing stuff. My car MOCs having headlights like these, that would be amazing. So I don't know why it's taken them so long to do that. I've been waiting and waiting for several years now for them to do that. The other thing too is if they could make this 1x1 quarter circle tile into transparent yellow and transparent red so that I can use these as well for headlights and taillights. So you can see that they would look really sleek going onto the corner of a car. And last but not least, this is one of my favorite Lego pieces, especially when it comes to car MOCs. And you can see that I use it on the corners of my cars on the majority of the time. But I think it would be really cool is if they made this piece in transparent red and transparent yellow so that these could be headlights and taillight pieces. So for this car, I also gave it the stance, which I really like. So the back end is sitting one plate taller and it's given it that kind of sleek sloped look to it. So I was able to create a more arched front fender, but on the back end, it just kind of goes straight and rounds off in the back. I really like this kind of sleek fastback shape to the back of the car with these 1x2 cheese wedge slopes. I really like how the back taillights came out, except for the fact that they stick out with really sharp corners. I really like that back bumper right there. I use these 1x1 cheese wedge slopes right there to kind of give the side window profile an upward slope look to it, even though there's no glass piece right there in that corner. I really like how this car turned out. It's a sport luxury coupe that kind of has a retro classic Alfa Romeo and Italian Lancia sports car look to it. The interior again is pretty simple. It just has a computer touchscreen. The car is autonomous. I've got a little suitcase back here in the back underneath the rear window. Another thing that I did was I added a little blue light right there to kind of give it a cool electric feel. A lot of cars nowadays will have little insignia badges right there coming off of the front fender, and that includes the car that I currently own today. It has a little badge right there, and so in this case I'm just using it as a glowing light, and just kind of imagine that the automaker's logo is embedded in that blue light right there, and it just glows and pulses, and even when you charge in your electric car it will glow and pulse to show you how full of a charge that the car has already. Now I also wanted to show you my new turntable. Just before recording this video I ended up designing this little turntable. It's just kind of quickly mashed together, but one thing that I'm really stoked about is how I was able to include the helicopter pull string into there. I was a little bit disappointed that Lego didn't design this feature to be properly centered. It's centered along this direction, but on this direction it is not centered. In fact, I'm using the smallest Technic gear in there, and I really thought I should have been able to use the Technic small black gears, and I'm surprised that I wasn't able to do that. They didn't design it for that. It looks like this whole system was not designed to be compatible with anything else within Lego, which I find to be very disappointing because it makes it a lot harder to incorporate this piece into any sort of modern build. I really like what I came up with. I can't imagine very many other uses for this piece here for the pull string helicopters, and the fact that I was able to incorporate this into my turntable, and now I'm able to rotate all my vehicles without having to do this. I can now, out of view, I can just pull on that and it will spin. Yeah, I love it. In the future, I will be doing more videos to add to this series of sports cars, of futuristic Paradisa style sports cars. So if you guys like my turntable, if you guys like my sports cars, if you guys like the MOCs and remocs that I've done to my sports cars, or even if you don't like it, go ahead and leave some comments. Show me your criticisms. I think I can handle it. And go ahead and smash the like button, even if you didn't like it, because you're awesome. Stay tuned for next week, because I have an amazing building coming up. I think you guys are going to love it. Very Paradisa style. I was not expecting to have even worked on that, or even to have gotten it done so quickly. It was another building frenzy. So on that note, I'll catch you guys later. And I have no idea where my sigfig just flew off to.